All right. You might remember that we have found that the inertia of a single point mass so this is the rotational inertia of a point mass is mr squared. That says that I have some axis of rotation and I have some point which is executing a circle because it's on, say, a massless rod or a string or something like that. And if it has mass m and radius r from this rotation, then it has a rotational inertia of m times r squared. But that's for a single point. We're going to be talking today about what happens when you have things that are extended, hoops and disks and people and so on, which are not made of points, and therefore we have to be careful. And before we dive into it, I want you to just give some thought to combining this thing with the idea that something is extended. All right, so think about this. So here we want to talk about a uniform disk, of mass m and radius r. So we have a solid thing, and the idea is that it is solid rather than a point, and it is rotating around some axis through its center. So it's doing something like this. And then we're going to talk about having a thin hoop of the same mass, and the same radius, so something like this. Sorry, not so great. Something like this, but it's a thin hoop, and so all the mass is in this outer ring here, but rotating also around a thing through its center and rotating in the same sense. So consider that uniform disk and that uniform thin hoop. And the question here is, which of those has a larger rotational inertia about an axis to the center and perpendicular to the plane of the object? So in these cases, which one has the larger rotational inertia? And, of course, think about why. Remember that we could imagine this as made of a whole bunch of points that make up the hoop or the disk. I'm going to show a few of them because I'm lazy. And the masses are the same, but in the case of the hoop, the mass is entirely constrained to that little region. But in the case of the disk, it extends everywhere in the disk. So there are masses very close to the axis, and they don't really contribute at all. They have a very small r square, whereas the stuff on the edge has a very large r square. For the hoop, all of it's on the edge, so we get more out. And so in the end, we get that the hoop has a larger inertia, which means that when the hoop is spinning, if they're spinning at the same rate, the hoop will have more energy in it. And thereon we'll see that means it's harder to spin the hoop, and it's harder to stop it once it is spinning. But now we're going to talk about that a little bit more formally. If an object is not point-like, then we need to use calculus to compute the moment of inertia, the rotational inertia. We have to do this kind of game where we do break it up into mental little collections of points, and then we say, oh, let's take one of those and see what its moment would be, and then add all of them up, which really is a recipe for integration in calculus. But this class is not a calculus-based class, so you don't have to worry about that. Nonetheless, there are some standard shapes that are worth knowing and that they kind of at least expect you to be familiar with, even if you're not going to derive them. And the ones, they're generally things that can roll, is what we're talking about, because we want to talk about rolling in our next section. So we have here things like a thin cylindrical shell about an axis. A thin cylindrical shell is also, if you compress it all the way down, it's just a hoop. Oops, sorry. We need smaller dot size. Yeah. That if you imagine taking all of that mass and compressing it, you could also make a thin ring. So the shell, cylindrical shell, also equals a ring or hoop. And it can be shown that the rotational inertia of that case is just mr squared. All of the mass is the distance r, so when we add all of it up, it still all contributes mr squared. We add all of them up, the r squares factor out, and we get total mr squared. Or, and this is about the center, by the way, we could have a solid cylinder about its axis, or the same thing, which would be a thin disk. So solid cylinder equals a disk, because it doesn't really matter where the mass is along this axis. It's always the same distance away. So the stuff along the axis, doesn't matter how you arranged along the axis of rotation, only perpendicular to that. So these two things, we'll often talk about rings and disks, but we do mean solid cylinders, or we mean hollow cylinders and solid cylinders. Your book gives you some other ones, like hollow cylinder about an axis, which is cute. That's a thing that has, it's not thin, but has an actual real inner radius. And then they give you some of the other ones, like cylindrical shells about diameters to the center, thin rods about perpendicularly end, and so on. And for the most part, you should not really worry about them. They don't have, I guess the thin rod perpendicular to its center. This could also be a meter stick. And this figure is in your book, so I don't care that I'm marking it up too much for you here. And sometimes we use that, the 1/12 ML square. To be honest, if they want you to use one of these, they give it to you. They don't expect you to remember any of them. However, it's still useful to note them and have at least some sense of their size, because that way you can do comparisons quickly, especially on multiple choice. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. Some of these make intuitive sense, and some of them do not. The hoop's mass is all at the same distance from the axis, so the moment of inertia is the same as an equivalent point mass. Right? All we've done is taken the point mass and smeared it out along a ring, but every little bit of mass is the same distance from the axis, so it still just contributes the same amount. And the disk has its mass closer on average to the axis, so its rotational inertia is less. It turns out to be kind of weird in that the disk is a little bit of the mean. This is not exactly true, but the solid disk is something like the mean of a single point and a hoop. Because if all of the mass were at the center, oops, sorry, it should be a hoop. If all of the mass were at the center, then you get zero rotational inertia. Things at the center don't contribute. And if all of it were at the edge, like a hoop, it would be mr squared. But it's actually like the disk actually turns out to be 1/2 mr squared. So it's like averaging 0 and mr squared. That's a way to remember it. It's not a particularly great way to remember it, but it is important to recognize that for equivalent mass and radius, the disk will always have less inertia than the hoop. The spherical shell and the sphere, they're just weird. They just fall out of the calculus. It's not a particularly fun integral. It's the kind of thing that calc teachers do to students when they want to torture them a little bit, and we're not going to run through it. But there is a pattern, all right, which you want to remember. One is that a hollow shape is always more than the equivalent filled shape. So a hollow cylinder has more inertia than a solid cylinder. And then a hollow sphere has more inertia than a filled sphere. And then secondarily, cylinders have more than spheres. Cylinders tend to have this stuff on spread out a little bit more from the axis than spheres. And so they tend to have more inertia. In fact, there's a weird little pattern. This doesn't seem to have anything else. I can't find any meaning for it, but it's kind of cute. The ring, hollow sphere, disk, and solid sphere, that's the order of decreasing inertia. And they all have the form of 2mr squared over some number, where for the ring, it's 2 over 2, so you just get mr squared. For the hollow sphere, it's 2 over 3 mr squared. For the disk, you get 2 over 4 mr squared. And for the solid sphere or a ball, you get 2 over 5 mr squared. Usually, of course, textbooks represent these as just mr squared and a half mr squared, but this pattern's kind of cute. And my instinct is that the fact that there's evenness for the cylinders and oddness for the spheres probably actually does mean something if you do a deep enough dive into the calculus of it, but that's not going to pay off for us here, so we're not going to. It's probably worth refreshing just why are we even talking about this, what do these things even mean. So we're going to go back to remember that the kinetic energy of a rotating object is 1/2 its rotational inertia times its rotational speed squared, which is, it's meant to be like the translational case, which was 1/2 mv square. And it's kind of traditional. I'll put like translation on this and rotation on this to keep them distinct. But it's important to recognize that really kinetic energy is just kinetic energy. And when we divide it into rotational and translational, that's an accounting trick we're doing where we're gathering up terms. We're not actually talking about transforming from one form of the energy to another or anything like that. There's no losses or anything because you're not actually converting. You're just saying, I'm grouping up some of this kinetic energy into a more convenient form. I do want to point out that, again, the idea is that the I here represents really how hard it is to get the thing spinning. And what we care about here is that if you have two things with the same angular speed omega, the thing with more inertia carries more energy, just like for kinetic energy. Translational kinetic energy, where at the constant speed, things have the same speed, the more mass carries more energy. We see then, therefore, a equivalent disk versus a hoop. If they have the same mass and the same radius, the hoop will always have more kinetic energy for a given speed. All right, these hoops and disks each have the same mass m, all the same m. The bigger ones have twice the radius of the smaller ones. Circle in blue the objects with the greatest rotational inertia, and in red the objects with the least rotational inertia. And here we're going to use again the idea that that hoops beat disks, and also cylinders beat spheres. So we can say that the largest will be when all of the mass is at the very largest radius. We're going to get, let's do that, we're going to get the most inertia. And we're going to know that the disk would be less than that. But, and then the smallest thing is going to be a disk with the least radius, so it's going to be this. And they're actually in order. That wasn't done on purpose, but they're in order going from high to low. The last thing we'll say about extended objects per se is this thing called the parallel axis theorem. If we know the rotational inertia of an object m about its own center of mass, say we know that, then there's a thing that you can prove that says that the rotational inertia about any other axis which is parallel to the original one but located a distance away will obey the following formula, that the rotational inertia around this new axis is the rotational inertia around the center of mass plus the total mass of the object times the distance that you've shifted the axis. So if we do like a quick drawing here, the idea being, if let's say that we have the solid disk, or we have solid hoop and we rotate about its center, then we know, or we've seen that this is just its center of mass, its center of mass rotational inertia is just mr square. Now let's say we take that hoop, but we rotate it around that point. We should mark the points in different color. So around that point. And so now it's doing some weird little thing. Oops. Where as we rotate it, right, it will still be a circle. These points hardly move at all, but now it's like, it's pretty faint, but let's see if we do a little darker than that. And then around like that, and then around like that. So it's doing this large scale sort of rotation, and the parallel axis theorem tells us that the new one is going to be the original, plus we've shifted the thing over by one radius, so it's going to be mr square. So in this case, we have doubled its rotational inertia by doing that. Now that might be hard to set up in a practical sense, but that's how we did it. It's important to understand, though, the parallel axis theorem is not directly assessed on the exam. So you're not going to do a calculation even like the one I just did, even though it's not that hard. But it's good to know that if we are off the center of mass, then the rotational inertia will be larger. And sometimes they'll have you do comparisons about that. So I'd like you to at least know that the inverse of this, which says that the rotational inertia around the center of mass is the lowest possible for any orientation of the axis. Like if we pick a particular direction that our rotation axis points in, the line that passes through the center of mass will be the rotational axis with least with least rotational inertia. And they kind of want you to know that. At least they've asked a couple of questions that hinge on that. That also will come back when we do dynamics in a little bit. We'll say, oh, that's why in general, when you push on something, if it's not otherwise constrained, it will tend to rotate about its center of mass, because that's the place where it's easiest to rotate about. All right.